So it's good to be at Junction Community Church. I'll tell you what, it's a great season to be a part of what God is doing here in our lives. You know, last week we wrapped up a series that we had been in that was called Road to Resurrection, and we took several weeks to walk through all of the various stops along the way. We started with the triumphal entry. Of course, we talked about the cross, and absolutely last week we talked about the resurrection. Such a powerful, powerful time as we celebrated the resurrection. Now, last week, as we talked through the resurrection, we discovered unspeakable joy, you know. And it's one of those things that in life, how many of you know that there are 1,000 things that will try to steal your joy? You might be the happiest person on earth in one moment, but it's the very next moment that's just going to try to steal your joy, take it away, and throw it on the ground, and then there you are, and you're trying to get through the rest of your day. You're trying to get through the rest of your morning. And so there are so many things that will try to steal our joy, but at the resurrection, we experience joy unspeakable. In fact, our takeaway was this from last week. At the resurrection, we encounter life, joy, and the strength to endure. At the resurrection, we encounter life, joy, and the strength to endure. Because the joy of the Lord is our strength. Yeah, absolutely. The joy of the Lord is our strength, and so we rely on God's joy to strengthen us and carry us through difficult moments and challenging times. And so at the resurrection, we encounter life, joy, and the strength to endure. We encounter that. And in the aftermath of the resurrection, the message of Christ comes to us, but it doesn't stop at the resurrection. That message of Christ does not stop at the resurrection. It continues. It continues forward, and I'll tell you what, the message of Christ has been advancing all the way for almost 2,000 years now. This message has been advancing, and it doesn't matter what's come against that message. This message has literally reached around the world, the message of the resurrection. But there definitely was a lot of opposition that came against the message of Christ. There was a lot of opposition. And it's still existent today. There's opposition to the message of Christ. Now, not only just from entities or nations or other religions or spiritual forces, but even in your own life, that message of Christ that God is trying to bring about in your life, there's opposition to that. And opposition sometimes shows up in the face of, having a difficult day, or it shows up in various places and areas of your life. But the ultimate thing we have to hold on to is that we have the joy and the strength that comes from the resurrection, because that opposition is going to come, but we're going to push through. Amen? We're going to push through. We're going to push through, and we're going to see God work in us. Now, last week we had an incredible time here at the church. In fact, we were praying that we would break 400 in attendance last week. That was our prayer. We were asking, God, we set a goal out there. Goals are a good thing. Goals will challenge you in your personal life, in your professional life. Goals will challenge you. Here at the church, we oftentimes set goals and we say, you know what, we're going to push for these things. And we don't always hit the goal, but I would rather just fall just short of a goal than not have a goal and be like, well, we hit it every time. We just didn't. But we set a goal for 400 people. Let me just say, last weekend here at Junction Community Church, I have to report that we had, over the weekend, we had 462 people come and be a part of Junction Community Church. Incredible. And so we were praying for 400. We actually exceeded that by 62, and that doesn't even include the over 100 people that joined us online last week. We had 102 people online. And so when you look at those numbers, last weekend we were celebrating the resurrection of Christ with 564 believers, not only here locally but around our world. And all I can say to that is only God. Only God. God is good. Now, the journey along the road to resurrection doesn't stop with the resurrection. It continues today. For the message of Christ has been, like I said before, it's been advancing from the moment Jesus commissioned His disciples in Matthew chapter 28. Now, every one of us here this morning is responsible for taking the message of Christ to what I would say the messes and the masses. That we're responsible for taking that message of Christ to the messes of our world and to the masses of humanity. We're called to do that. That's what God has put on our hearts to do. That's what God has called us to do. That's why, in fact, we exist as a church. We exist as a church to do one thing, and that's to lead people into a growing relationship with Christ. It's that simple. That's what we want to do here at JCC. And so we have to realize, though, that if we're going to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, it happens in three different areas in our lives. It happens individually, that we have this individual responsibility. It happens collectively. We have this collective responsibility. And it happens in another area called vicariously. And I'm going to explain more of that in a minute, but it happens individually, it happens collectively, and it absolutely happens vicariously. I'm going to talk more about that towards the end of the message. But I want to take a moment to further explore what that means for us today, all of this that we're talking about. And so let's take a moment to build a biblical foundation for taking Jesus to others. And so it starts with Jesus and his final words to his disciples before he ascended into heaven. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. In fact, that's where we really pick up the story from last week. We were in Matthew chapter 27 and moved into chapter 28 last week. And we're going to come back to Matthew chapter 28 and start in verse 16. It says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go." Remember, Jesus had met a few women that had went to the tomb. He had met them and said, "Look, I want you to go to my disciples and tell them to wait for me. Tell them I'm going to meet them in Galilee." And so here it is. Then the 11 disciples, they're responding to this message that he had given and to these women, to Mary, to the two Marys, and now they're going and they're meeting him there. So it says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go." Verse 17, "When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted." And so, to me, that gives me great comfort, because there was this group of 11 disciples that had now gathered together, and their immediate response was one of worship, just like we worship this morning. In fact, I'll tell you what, you want to experience breakthrough in your life, push through in praise. Push through in praise. I'm telling you, you're feeling like, man, I'm going through something challenging. I'll tell you what, it's in those moments that we push through in praise and we say, "God, you are good. You are good. Despite of what's going on in my life, I'm going to praise you. I'm going to acknowledge you." And so they come to this place where they worship, but then it says, but some doubted. Some doubted that it was Jesus. Some doubted the facts of the story. Some doubted the reality that Jesus had resurrected, and there was doubt. And I don't know about you, but that gives me comfort, because I doubt at times. I struggle with my faith at times. Anybody else? And when I do, I can go back and say, hey, these guys who saw Jesus, and they saw his earthly ministry, and they saw the resurrection, they even, after seeing the resurrected Christ, he's standing in front of them, they too struggled with doubt. And so, for me, it reminds me that it's okay to struggle with doubt, but the facts remain. Jesus is resurrected. Jesus is risen. Jesus does have plans and purposes for our lives, and we can trust that. And so, verse 18, it goes on, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me.'" And he's declaring that he has absolute authority over heaven, over earth, over everything. That Jesus himself has absolute authority. And then in verse 19 it says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations." And what he's doing is he's commissioning the believers of his, and specifically the disciples or the apostles. He is commissioning them to go and take his message to the masses. He's commissioning them to go into the messy places of life and take the gospel to where it's messy and take the gospel to the masses. He's saying, look, guys, therefore go and make disciples. And he's saying, based on the authority I have not only over the earth, but even in heaven itself, I want you to go and I want you to make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Verse 20, "And teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." And so we see this commission here. We see this challenge that Jesus has now come to the disciples, and he said, look, I'm getting ready. In fact, really what he's saying is, I'm getting ready to ascend into heaven. I'm getting ready to take a heavenly place. And as I do, I want you to go and make a difference. I want you the disciples to go and carry this message of resurrection, this message of the cross and the resurrection, this message of Christ. I want you to go and share it with all of the world. And so he says, go and make disciples. You see, part of that making disciples is that it's not always easy to make disciples. It's easy to attract the crowd. And I'm just going to be real honest with you this morning. You know, we don't do a massive Easter egg hunt anymore. And some people said, well, why don't you do that? I'll kind of explain why. Because here's the thing. We used to host, maybe you're newer to the church and you have no idea, and maybe you've been around and you've seen it, but we used to host easily the largest Easter egg hunt in the city. And we're not by any means the largest church, but we had the ability to attract a crowd around an Easter egg hunt. We just kind of had the secret sauce, if you will. And so we did promotion and advertising, and it was a great event in terms of what it did for the team of the church. But I'll tell you what, as far as leading people to Christ, didn't do it. It didn't do it. In fact, most people, because here's the thing, we get to find out what people are searching for. And, there was a couple of years ago, we were like, I don't know that this is actually helping us lead people into a growing relationship with Christ, because that's our mission. We said, look, I don't know that it's actually doing that. I don't know that it's actually helping lead people into a growing relationship with Christ. And so we did some research, and we found out that people that were researching and searching for the egg hunt that we put on were actually searching for Parks and Rec Easter egg hunt. And that's how they were finding us, because we were hosting it at Lincoln Park. And so they were thinking that Parks and Rec were putting this on. I was like, Parks and Rec didn't do any of that. It was Jesus and Junction Community Church that did that, So we came to the point where we said, you know what, we're not going to spin our wheels in doing an event like that. We want to help people connect to Christ. And so we don't want to just put on an event that attracts a crowd. We want to disciple people. We want people to grow in a relationship with Christ. And that's true for every one of us this morning, no matter where you're at, no matter if you've been a believer for a long time or you're new to Christ. We all want to grow. We want to help you grow. We want to help you develop as a disciple. But I'll tell you what, making disciples is not always easy. It's not always popular either. Because I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier to attract a crowd. The last crowd that we attracted at Lincoln Park, the newspaper said it was over 5,000 people. You know how many people we had in church that Sunday? Not even half of what we had in church this past weekend. And so I'm telling you, like we want to make disciples. But before I get too ahead of myself this morning, that's what the commission of Christ was, that we would go and make disciples. That's what he was telling us to do, to make disciples. And I love it because God has called us to take Jesus to the messes and the masses of life. In fact, making disciples can be outright messy at times, but it's what God has called us to do. And so, church, I'm speaking more to the church this morning. I'm speaking to those who call JCC home. He's called us, church, to make disciples. He's called us to make a difference in people's lives. He's called us to walk with people in the messy areas of life and help them know Christ in a personal way. And so I love the interaction that Jesus had with some of his first disciples. In fact, they were fishermen, and Jesus used language they would understand. Let's look at it in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. These guys were, that's what they did for a living. They were fishermen. And Jesus comes to them, and he sees them. He sees that they're fishing, they're casting a net, and he says, come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And he begins to speak their language. He says, look, guys, I want to talk to you about something, because I want you to go out and I want you to fish for people. I want you to fish for men, for women, for children. And at once it says they left their nets and followed him. And Jesus is calling his first disciples, and he's saying to them, look, guys, I know that you're fishermen. I know that anybody love to fish? I love to fish. In fact, I'm going to be fishing this afternoon. It's going to be awesome. And whether I catch fish or not, I'm going to be fishing, because just being out around the lake is a good time, right? So I'm going to be fishing. But here's the reality. I love to fish. That's all good. But you know what? And in fact, a lot of people like to fish, but not everybody likes to clean fish. Everybody gets excited like, oh, there's a fish on it. Especially, Sayla, she caught a fish the other day when we went fishing for spring break. She's bringing it in. I'm like, you want to touch it? She's like, I'm good. And so everybody wants to fish, but not everybody wants to clean fish. And I'm telling you, at Junction Community Church, we want to get into the dirty, messy business of cleaning fish. And it's not always easy. And it's not always pretty. But I'm telling you, as a church, we're declaring that not only do we want to catch fish at Junction Community Church or catch people, but we want to lead people into that growing relationship with Christ. And sometimes that's going to be messy. Sometimes it's going to be messy, and we're going to walk through with them, and they're going to fail, and they're going to be discouraged, and we're going to pick them up, and guess what? They're going to start walking, and they're going to feel the joy, and guess what? They're going to fall down again. But you know what we're going to do? We're not going to leave them when they're down and out. We're going to walk with them, we're going to carry them, and as a church, we're going to declare that we're going to make disciples for the glory of Jesus Christ and His kingdom. That's what we're going to do. And I look around this place, and I see people all over this place. I see people that whether you're a small group leader, whether you lead a ministry, you walk with people. And it's not always easy. It's outright messy sometimes. But we don't just want to catch fish. We want to clean fish too. And so Jesus has always been about sending people. He's always been about sending His disciples. That's what his mission as He closed His time on earth was, that He was commissioning His disciples. He was saying, look, guys, I know we just experienced the resurrection. I know this is powerful. I know that this is an amazing moment. But He's saying, look, I'm now sending you to go and make a difference. I'm sending you to go and reach people for the gospel. I'm sending you to make disciples. And so Jesus has always been about this. I want to look to a couple of examples. I'm not going to read out of Matthew chapter 10. But if you go to Matthew chapter 10, the entire chapter is dedicated to Jesus sending the 12 disciples out. He gives them instruction and what they're to do and what they're to say and what's going to happen. And He gives them all this instruction. And so I would encourage you, go read Matthew chapter 10, because it's really the entire chapter that describes Jesus sending out the 12. And then there's another moment. Not only does He send the 12, but there's another moment where He sends 72. And in Luke chapter 10, verse 1, it says this: after the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of Him to every town and place where He was about to go. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of Him to every town and place where He was about to go. And so the reality is that God is about sending. Not only did He commission us in Matthew chapter 28, and not only did He send the 12 in Matthew chapter 10, and not only did He send the 72 in Luke chapter 10, but I'm telling you, He is sending us to make a difference in our world. He is sending Junction Community Church to our community to be a difference maker, to be hope where people are feeling hopeless, to be light where it seems that the dark is overrun light. But I'm telling you, that's what God is calling us to do. And I am excited about that. I believe that God is calling us into those places to make a difference in people's lives. And you say, well, how can we do that? How can I do that? We're going to talk more about what that looks like for you individually next week. But the reality is God has positioned you. He's put you in a place of where you're at. And you're saying, look, I don't got it all figured out. He's not looking for people who have it figured out. He's looking for people who say, I'm willing. God, would you use me? Would you use me in all my faults and all my failures and all my shortcomings, my lack of knowledge of the Bible or whatever it might be? Would you use me to be hope and light in dark places? Would you use me? And so that's exactly what He wants to do in us and through us if we are willing. And so the commission that Jesus gave to His disciples is the same commission that He gives to us. The same words that Jesus spoke in Matthew chapter 28 to the disciples about going and making disciples is the same word that He gives to every one of us this morning. Go and make disciples. And I'll tell you what, this commission is far beyond, like I said, just individually. It's what we do collectively. I believe this statement has just rocked me this morning, all morning long. In fact, I woke up extremely early for me. I don't know what early for you is, but for me it was really early. For me, I woke up, I'm sure it was a little bit before 4 o'clock this morning, and I was trying to go back to sleep, you know? You know that feeling? You're just like, don't open your eyes, pretend you're asleep. Don't move too much. Stay very still. Breathe. Pray. Okay. I'm not going back to sleep. I guess I'll just wake up. So about 4:04 this morning, I got up and I said, all right, I'm just going to start preparing for this morning and discovering what God has and reading His Word and discovering what He wants to say. And I kept just overwhelmingly, I kept getting this message just in my heart, this message of Jesus is sending us to the messes and the masses of our world. Jesus is sending us to the messes and the masses of our world. And He wants to do that not only individually. He wants to send us into messy places. And I know, like, life is challenging at times. But He wants to send us into those challenging places and be light. And not only so I really see that. And then it's individually. And like I said, we're going to talk more about, but it's collectively. And I love what God's doing in us. And then it's this idea of vicariously. So it's this threefold ability for God to really use us and work through us and speak through us and speak through our lives to make disciples. And so as we prepare to close today and kind of wrap things up, I really didn't want to be completely long-winded this morning. I wanted to make sure to just get across what God wanted to speak into our hearts. But taking Jesus to the messes and the masses is a personal responsibility for all of us. It's a personal responsibility. It's not something that is simply for the church, if you will, the collective body. It's for every one of us as individuals, that we have a personal responsibility to take the gospel to others. But it's also a collective responsibility for all of us at Junction Community Church. It's a collective responsibility. It's a responsibility that every one of us together as a whole, as a body of believers, that we have a collective responsibility to take the message of Christ to the messes and the masses of our world. In fact, let me just pause in that thought right there, because I absolutely love what God is doing at Junction Community Church. I believe that He's doing something incredible, something that, just like I shared a moment ago about the kind of crowd that we experienced last weekend, it's only God. It's an only God type experience, and that is what we're seeing God do here at Junction Community Church. That we as a community are called to be light, and we're called to share Jesus with our community. And we're doing that through various avenues. You know, the Dream Team party this last week, we realized that God is opening up some incredible doors of ministry, opportunities for us to feed the needy, for us to clothe the needy, for us to be able to minister to those who are what we would consider maybe less fortunate. But the bottom line is God is using us to reach out as a community, as a whole, and make a difference in people's lives. And I love it. I love what we're seeing happening. Now, I'm personally excited about the prospect of building a new multi-purpose building in back. We've been praying about this. We've been praying about it. It's been one of those things that I really feel like it was God ordained. I really feel like it was God led. It was God inspired as we went through our 21 days of prayer and fasting in January, where He started putting on our hearts this dream. He started literally giving us the dream in our dreams. He started giving it to me and others, and we started praying through that. And it wasn't something that, honestly, we came and we said, we have this master plan and we're going to plan this out. It was simply God putting it in our hearts and in our lives. And so what we started to do is we started to pray through that. We started to say, God, what would it look like if we built a new multi-purpose building in back, where we can continue to reach out to our community, where we can continue to minister to youth and minister to children in a better way, where we can possibly open up the doors of that community, that building to be a community center that would reach people. And I'll tell you what, God is already making provision. In fact, I just want to share that this past week, as God is working towards this and putting this in our hearts and making provision, we had our first $10,000 donation come in for that. And I say our first because I believe it's the first of many. That we're going to have more people that are going to come up and they're going to say, here's another $10,000. I believe that there's people in this room, and you say, I don't know how. I don't even know how it's possible. But there's people in this room. You're going to walk up to me in the coming months, and you're going to say, Pastor, here's $10,000. And I don't know how God's going to make that happen for you. But when He does, you're going to say, only God. Only God. Only God. And so we're seeing it happen. We're seeing it happen. And all I would say is that if we trust God through this process, if we hold on wholeheartedly and we say, God, do what only you can in and through our lives, I believe He will do great things. I believe He will use us to reach our world. He will use us to share the message of Christ, again, with the messes and the masses. And so, not only is He going to do that through us as a church, but I talked about vicariously. What does that mean, vicariously? That God is using us to share His gospel message literally around the world. And in 2 weeks from today, we're going to be having what we call Missions Sunday. We're going to talk about how we're invested in church planting. We're invested in missions. Last year, we gave more to missions than ever before. In fact, as a church, we gave more money away last year than ever before. And I'll tell you what, I just see that as God is blessing us. He's opening up His floodgates of heaven, and I'm not, don't get this wrong. He's not some genie in a bottle. You don't throw money at God and He throws money at you. That's not the way it works. Like everything you have is already God's. He already gave it to you. We just give it back. And we just say, God, here's what we have. Here's who we are. We just want to give it back to you. And so, but the reality is God is blessing us. God is moving in great ways. So in 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about how vicariously we're sharing that message all around the world, literally all around the world. We are reaching all around the world, from China to South America. God is just doing to Europe. God is to church planting. There's just some great things happening. And so we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. You do not want to miss that. We're going to have a great experience with that. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. And I can't let you in on the fun. You got to be here. So you don't want to miss 2 weeks from today. It's going to be incredible. But I believe, and I said this on Friday night, I believe our best days are ahead of us. And not only did I say it Friday night, but I've said it over and over again. And for the last 10 years, I've been saying that. And this year, we're celebrating 10 years of ministry at Junction Community Church. I'll be celebrating 20 years in ministry this coming fall. And I'll tell you what, I believe that the next decade and the next 20 years are going to be better than the first 20, than the first 10, than all those things combined, because our best days are ahead of us. But as a takeaway today, as we experience all that God is doing in us, here's what I would like to say. Jesus has sent us to share His message with the messes and the masses. That's it. I've said it over and over again today. But Jesus has sent us to share His message with the messes and the masses. And so all over this place today, we have a personal responsibility to that. All over this place today, we have a collective responsibility to that. All over this place, we have a vicarious responsibility that we live through others to make that a reality. But I'll tell you what, it's none more the reality than right here, right now. And so with every eye closed here this morning, if you're watching us online this morning, with every eye closed, I just want to take an opportunity to give you the opportunity to know Christ in a personal way. So whether you're in this place or you're watching online, I want to give you that opportunity this morning to say, you know what, I want to accept and know Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And so, with every eye closed, if you're here today and you're saying, that's me, would you just lift your hand right where you're at? Would you just say, that's me, I want to commit my life to Christ? God sees your hands. Or maybe you're saying, I need to recommit my life to Christ. Would you just raise your hand all over this place? You say, that's me. God sees your hands. You say, that's me. Would you just lift your hand real high and then put it right back down? God sees your hand. God sees your hand. I'm going to ask for everyone who lifted your hand. I'm going to ask for everyone listening to me this morning, whether you're online or whether you're here in this place, to repeat a simple prayer of faith after me. Would you say, Jesus, today I give you my life. Cleanse me of my sin. Forgive me of my sin. Make me new from this day forward, that I can make you known to the masses and take you to the masses. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Can we just put our hands together and thank God for those that are responding?